Dennis, thanks very much for joining us. Just give us your outlook, I suppose, on some of the key themes for Europe in 2021.
And of course, we had an unprecedented year in 2021. But if we look at our recent outlook that was published last year, we look at our markets from a risk-adjusted perspective. And what we do is look at our main assumptions that go into our base case. And one of the most important drivers is where bond yields are, because real estate is really approached from a multi-asset level perspective. So it's relative versus fixed income and equities. And for our main assumption, i.e. the government bond yields, we expect lower for longer. And the reasons for that have already been outlined by many others. But what I would like to emphasize on is like the current debt levels is the debt in the economy is at such a high level that increases in government bond yields are quite difficult to go up. And next to that, we don't yet see any inflationary pressure coming through when we look at the 5-year forward interest rate. So bond yields are staying low for longer, and this really helps us in terms that the spreads between these bond yields and property yields are still quite at a high level. I would say real estate on an absolute value is pretty expensive from an historic perspective, but relatively it looks very attractive, and that's also what you see back in allocations that are being increased towards real estate. Then the other part from what we see is, of course, the occupier market, and there are some tailwind sectors, so to say, which we expect to continue, like the logistics, like the residential, which had a great performance, especially logistics in 2020, where we saw yield compression in almost every single market. And this is really driven by a quick, rapid increase in demands, of course, by the acceleration of e-commerce, everybody living at home, of course, ordering more online. And I expect this trend to continue. So logistics is really one of our sectors that is on top of our list. And that's also being one of our outcomes from our risk-adjusted return framework that we always publish on a European level, but this year also for the first time on a global level. We also see that residential, of course, is one of the sectors that gained a lot of traction, and that will continue into 2021. Of course, when you have a gainer like logistics, retail has been suffering on the other end for kind of the same reasons as the e-commerce trend is, of course, accelerating, and shops not being able to open, of course, has had massive implications on the retail sector, and we've seen values dropping. But also within the retail sector, there are, of course, different segments, and for example, the grocery part of the market has performed very well, and we could see that back in returns in that specific part of the retail market. To finish it up, of course, with the office market, which has seen values dropping a little bit, but we have to look at the office market from a demand and supply perspective. The supply is very muted in most of the cities, and when we had the discussion on the Dutch briefing, we also heard about the very low vacancy in the markets compared to when the GFC started. So it's also a different kind of crisis that we currently have compared with back then. And of course, the demand, everybody is talking about the working from home and the implications that it will have on the office market. And I think currently what we see is that it's too early to really say which direction it will go. Of course, we see surveys of companies looking at more people going to work from home. But on the other hand, we also see the stories about the office being repurposed, like being more like a meeting place for people. And also offices might need to have more space per worker to be in line with hygiene standards that might be put in place. And personally, I'm always been a big fan of the office market, specifically because of the benefits it has in terms of agglomerations, because being in a close vicinity of others always brings innovation, sharing of knowledge, and that's always been good for productivity.
Great to catch up. Thanks very much, Dennis.